It's 1 o'clock and welcome to the Deal Doctor live stream. No funny opening today. And the reason is I want to talk about something pretty serious and congratulate 5-Star and its agents for jumping in and saving some dogs. Special shout out to Joanna Lasser, Kim Baker, and Tim Updike, and anyone else who participated in rescuing the dogs which were starving in a house. We accomplished the objective. My understanding is that the dogs are now with Pound Buddies and are going to get some care and food and medical treatment that they sorely need. I'm really proud of 5-Star and its agents, and I think we deserve to take a moment and say we did the right thing by interceding on the dog's behalf. I also want to address this issue in a broader scale and tell everyone that our agency duties for our clients, in this case, let's pretend that we were the listing agents. Our agency responsibilities do not extend to keeping quiet about illegal activities. And in this case, there was clearly some abuse. I'm not going to speculate on the motivation for it. I don't think that that's appropriate, but we do know that the dogs were not being cared for properly. But let me explain a few things and tell you a couple of quick stories. Where in one case, I walked into a house that there were 3 or 4 young men lined up on a couch. They had lines of cocaine in front of them, and they were snorting cocaine in a house that was owned by a landlord who was our client. And we all just sort of stood there in shock that they would be so brazen as to break the law in front of a bunch of real estate agents. In that particular case, we had to inform our client that his house, his rental property, was being used for illicit activities, and that if the police were informed, they could confiscate his house as a drug house. We called the landlord, the owner of the property, immediately, and he immediately evicted them because they were in violation of their lease agreement. Sometimes you got to do what's right. Sometimes that takes some courage and some judgment. I know that in another situation, we as a group of agents who were on tour walked into a home during the dead of winter. It was cold inside the house, and there were 2 babies running around in diapers. You could see that they were cold and shivering. And we felt it was important that we call Child Protective Services, and they took the kids out of the house because they were being neglected. It's not a decision that you make easily, but it's an important one. When we see something, say something. We certainly don't want to broadcast it and risk, a defamation of character lawsuit against us. But yesterday was a good example of how well the 5-Star Connect page works. We shared a lot of information very, very quickly, and we were successful in getting the dogs rescued. I applaud you all. It was a great effort. Well done. Moving on. Some of you may have noticed that the the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement and the listing agreements have changed. Went out recently, and I want to point out a couple of things that are really important. bear in mind that of the 11 or 12 boards that are involved in Flex MLS, 10 of them use the West Michigan Purchase Agreement. I know that Kalamazoo has its own forms, and there have been no changes. I had this conversation just a few minutes ago with Kim, and Kim says there have been no changes on the GCAR forms. So I want to address that right away, that if you're on GCAR, the next few minutes probably aren't going to help you a lot. We certainly, if GCAR forms had changed, we were going to address those as well, but they haven't changed. So one of the big changes, most notable changes in my opinion, is the issue about earnest deposits. Before, I've sat here in front of you and said, you have to, unless it's otherwise stipulated, you must collect the earnest deposit. You must get the earnest deposit in your hand at the time you write the offer. Well, forget about all that, because they changed the purchase agreement, and they changed it in a really good way, I think. Now the purchase agreement says that you are responsible for collecting the purchase agreement from the buyer within 72 hours of the fully executed buy-sell, fully executed purchase agreement. And that's a really big change. I'm looking here. Forgive me. Well, well, that's embarrassing. It's on page 5 of the new purchase agreement, and that says that that as the agent, you must collect the earnest deposit within 72 hours of the fully executed purchase agreement. That's a really, really big change and very important. It really gets us around a lot of issues. One is, when you collect the earnest deposit, you have to deliver it as immediately as possible to 5-Star. That still remains true under the Michigan Occupational Code. So you as the agent don't have 72 hours to deliver it to 5-Star once you get it. The broker must deposit it within 72 hours, or the buyer must deliver it within 72 hours, and we need to deposit it as immediately as possible. Let's pretend that you get that earnest deposit within 3 hours after the fully executed purchase agreement, and you deliver it that same day to 5-Star. We then have 48 hours to get that deposited in our trust account. So be aware that the law hasn't changed as it regards what we are required to do as the broker once we are handed that check. The difference is that we don't have to collect it at the purchase agreement. At the moment the purchase agreement is written, we now have 72 hours in which the buyer has to deliver that. What's another really cool thing about this is that sometimes we never put a deal together. We may write it, there may be competing offers, and so we're constantly in this process of collecting and depositing earnest deposits and then having to refund them out. This new language really helps prevent that. I applaud the Forms Committee for making that change. So be very sure that you read that language in there about the 72 hours. I think it's very important. Another change that was made is they added the attached smart home devices into the language of fixtures. In other words, they have things like ceiling fans, wall-to-wall carpeting, so on and so on, and attached smart home devices such as a Nest thermostat, or I'm forgetting the irrigation system, the sprinkler system that is smart-based. all of those things, according to the new purchase agreement, must remain with the house unless otherwise stipulated. And if you don't think that that is actually an issue, I can assure you it is, because it happened just last week. One of our clients, a seller, took their Nest thermostat with them, and the buyer moved in, and there was a $30 thermostat on the wall from Meyer or wherever, and it wasn't the thermostat that they thought they were getting when they made the offer. Ultimately, it I think has worked out that the seller has returned it, but when you're taking a listing and when you're writing an offer, be sure that you communicate to the parties that smart home devices are considered fixtures. They are in the purchase agreement. You can underline them, you can highlight them, you can write them out as an exception and stipulate very clearly that they are to remain with the property. No matter what you do, make sure that everybody understands that smart home devices are intended to remain with the property. Another really good change that they made was under paragraph, what is now 6, where they talk about water softeners which are owned or rented. Those were the two options previously, and as we know, sometimes there's simply not one there, and so there wasn't an option to mark not applicable. There is now. They've added a third box which says that is not applicable. Same thing as it regards fuel tanks, which may be owned, rented, or simply not applicable. So I think they've made a couple of really good improvements in this new purchase agreement. They moved the possibility of dual agency disclosure page, or paragraph, which was back down about number 10. They've moved that up into where the remainder of agency discussions go on. I think that's a cool thing. And another really important thing they did is they clarified about well and septic inspections. They are making it very clear in this paragraph, this new paragraph, that the seller is responsible to arrange and pay for a well and septic inspection, regardless of whether there is county protocol or not. So it really eliminates that whole discussion, so that the purchase agreement, again, unless the buyer waives it in writing, the seller is going to be responsible for ordering and ultimately paying for the well and septic inspection. And here's the new paragraph. I just found it. For the good faith deposit, it says it shall be submitted to the broker within 72 hours of the effective date of this agreement and shall be applied against the purchase price. If the good faith deposit is not received within 72 hours, the seller may terminate or is returned for insufficient funds. The seller may terminate this agreement until such time as the good faith deposit is received. If the seller terminates this agreement, the seller waives any claim to the good faith deposit. So that's the new language. I think it's really, really an improvement. We don't have to be refunding checks for deals that never came together. So that's that. They also added a little disclosure down here about wire fraud. Now, I had the question come up, well, does that mean that we don't have to include that in our current paperwork? and our current signatures. As many of you who've gotten emails from me have seen, I have it in big letters, the language about wire fraud. Wire fraud, in my opinion, is so dangerous and so prevalent that I think that any and all disclosure about it is important. I don't think that we can say it too often. Will we require that be a separate form signed as part of the closing? That's not an issue that we've had an opportunity to address, but we will, and we'll let you know. But I think wire fraud is so dangerous that we can't disclose too often, too many times, for buyers and sellers to beware of moving funds around by wire. Let's see, what else? The listing agreement, as I said, also talks about the possibility of dual agency up in a new spot. It talks about the brokerage fee being some percentage of the sales price, or some dollar amount, a fixed dollar amount, whichever is greater. Before, if you had that language in there, you sometimes had arguments over, we were only going to pay, $2,000 flat fee, or we were going to pay 3%. Now it's very clear that if you're going to offer two different commissions, that stipulates whichever is greater is going to take precedent. What else we got? Oh, surveys, yeah. You've all heard me say for a long time that the only thing that's a survey is a boundary survey. Nothing else is a survey. End of story. A mortgage sketch is not a survey. It's a mortgage sketch. The only thing that is going to hold up in a court of law is a boundary survey. That's where they actually locate the iron stakes on a property, and the way that you can tell if it's a boundary survey is the little circles at the corners of the property are filled in are fully blacked in. So if they're little open circles, it's not a boundary survey. If there are no circles at all, it's not a boundary survey. What I like about this change is that they have eliminated any other option other than a boundary survey as being a survey. A surveyor's report or sketch, parentheses, not a boundary survey, is recertified to boundary, showing the approximate location of improvements. It should never have been included as a survey option because it's not a survey. Simple as that. So I'm really pleased that the Forms Committee caught that finally and have said you got two options. You can get a boundary survey or no survey at all. If you want to write in there that the buyer will accept something other than a survey like a mortgage sketch, you're certainly free to do that. But it's not a survey if it's not a boundary survey. The other thing I'll mention about boundary surveys is always when you are dealing with meets and bounds, particularly in rural areas, be sure that you get an estimate before you commit either party to pay for them. Boundary surveys in meets and bounds, irregular descriptions and so on can cost thousands of dollars. So before you commit your buyer or your seller to paying for a boundary survey where it's meets and bounds description, get an estimate before you head down that road. So how are we doing on questions? Any questions? Tim Creech, my Irish Hills fan club, is here. Thanks, Tim. Welcome. I appreciate you joining us. Who else is out there? Anyone? One of the things that we've talked about is how to keep the Deal Doctor live stream fresh every Monday. We don't want it to become stale and go over the same things over and over. So in the coming weeks, we're going to change it up and we're going to throw some curves at you. And I hope that you'll enjoy them. I hope that it will cause you to tune in. We are going to be talking in the future about topics like, do you have to have a DBA according to according to Laura? What must your DBA say, or how? Where are the rules? What are the rules as it regards what you can have on your signs in relationship to what is on your license? I see that Joanna's saying she's here. Again, thank you, Joanna, for all your efforts, as well as Kim and Tim, who jumped all over this starving dog thing yesterday, and sounds like we got some great results. So I think we deserve to feel pretty proud of our agents for doing that. So again, thank you. What else? We're at about 20 after. One of the other things that we talked about was that the live stream doesn't have to be 30 minutes. We're going to go until I have covered the issues that I had for you today, and at this point I have, but I'm going to give an opportunity for a couple of minutes here for anyone who is tuning in to ask a question. Bear in mind that if you watch this later and have a question, feel free to put it on there. We'll answer it, even if it's 8, 9 o'clock tonight, sometime tomorrow. We'll make sure that you get an answer, even if you're not watching the live stream. We will still respond to any questions. So we actually have something that borders on sunshine out there today. I'm not sure if I can cope with that after the weekend, but I'm really happy that the wind has died down, and it's still a little sketchy out there driving, so if you're out there, please be careful. If Dom has no more questions for me, and he's shaking his head no, I wish you a great day, great week, and Joanna, keep us posted on the dogs. Well done. Thank you.